Welcome, everybody. So glad to have you with us today for a virtual meeting with one of our scientists. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Lindsay, and I work with the education team at the Natural History Museum. Now, today we're meeting with a special guest from our Research and Collections Department. The Natural History Museum is home to 35 million objects and specimens. Our scientists use these collections to conduct research on people and nature, past and present. Each scientist has a special area of focus for their research, but together they're helping to build the history of life on our planet. In just a moment, we're going to hear from Dr. Celestian, Curator of Mineral Sciences at the Natural History Museum. We'll hear how Dr. Celestian is looking for life on other planets and moons and why he thinks it could be there. We'll learn about how scientists use all of the strange life we see on Earth, such as halophiles or bacteria that live in super salty water, as a starting point for looking for life in the solar system. Dr. Celestian will share how he's investigating the minerals on Earth and beyond, and how the minerals help tiny creatures persist for possibly hundreds of millions of years. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen now so we can meet our presenter today. You're going to see me again in just a little bit. Hi, Dr. Celestian.
Hi, thank you for the introduction. That was great.
Yeah, excited to hear about it.
All right, let me start my share. Is that okay? All right, so welcome everybody. Thank you for joining me here, and I'm really excited. Welcome to my home. This is the one room in the house where I can get some no background behind me, and so I can talk to you guys without much distraction. But here I am. I'm the curator of mineral sciences at the Natural History Museum, and I'm also affiliated with the Jet Propulsion Laboratory at NASA. And I also teach some classes over at the University of Southern California as well. And I never thought I would be in this position where I'm in. Not any time during my educational career did I think that I would be working with NASA scientists or even being part of NASA. That just sort of happened along the way. So it's really remarkable how that came to be. I didn't even think that minerals were even a place to study growing up. Both my parents were educators, but it wasn't until I got to college where I really liked minerals. I took one class and felt like this was a really multidisciplinary aspect. And that's something that I really am interested in, is how minerals, how life, how history all interact with each other. And it can inform new ideas for moving the science forward. So I'm really excited. And at the museum, it really helps being surrounded by a lot of biologists, by historians, by archaeologists and anthropologists, and you can solve some really amazing questions. So one of these things that I never thought I'd be working on is looking for life in other planets and other moons. And how we go about doing that is, well, I'll just show you a video of what the gist is. So this is a video that I made, and it's about searching for life in crystals. There's no audio on it right now. I'll just narrate my way through it. So where we start looking is in these really salty environments. Now we start looking off in salty environments because this is where really resistant life can be, life that can survive in extremely harsh conditions. So you find these salt lakes, and these salt lakes they don't last forever, and the sun on Earth will dry them up and the water will begin to evaporate. But anything that's dissolved in that water will start to grow crystals, like how you have sugar crystals growing in super sugary water as the water evaporates. But these crystals grow in a particular pattern in that they form these step-like structures. And in the steps of how the crystal grows, water gets trapped in there, water that just doesn't evaporate, and the crystal continues to grow and continues to grow, and the water gets trapped inside the crystal. Well, anything that's inside the water, so it's the crystal growing bigger and bigger, anything that's in the water at that time also gets trapped in the crystal. And halophiles are one of those things. Those are bacteria that really like to live in super, super salty water. In fact, if they were to go in regular water, they would die. They just cannot live there. But another thing is that they have adapted. They're exposed to all the harmful rays of our sun, and they produce a chemical called the beta carotene. This is the same chemical that makes oranges orange. This is the same thing that makes carrots carrot colored, the orange color that you see. A lot of fruits and vegetables have this orange color, and it protects them. And so the idea is that you then send a rover to another planet and look for those signs, look for signs of, maybe not look for the life itself, but look for signs of life producing chemicals. And beta carotene is one example of that, something that can protect the bacteria from dying. And Mars is one prime example of why that is. Oh, I'll skip that through. Because Mars doesn't have much of an atmosphere, doesn't have any clouds, it has a tremendous amount of ultraviolet radiation coming from the sun. And anything that lives on the surface would have to be able to protect itself from ultraviolet radiation. So here's a salt crystal. This is like a table salt that you have at home. So these are very big. These are crystals that might be an inch or so in diameter. You notice that they're pinkish in color. They're pink because of all the beta carotene that's still in that. Now, this is from a salt lake here in Southern California, Searles Lake, just outside of Los Angeles. And it's pink because of all that beta carotene. And the bacteria that are inside these crystals still are living. Here are some other examples of other halite crystals, again, just regular salt crystals. This is from a mine in Poland, and it's green because it has copper minerals inside of it, causing it the green color. And here is another salt crystal, and you can actually see even fluids, these little square right here, and these squares here, those are trapped fluids inside the crystal. And that's where we look to see if there's any bacteria in there. But this blue color comes from radiation damage. So if there's any radioactive, naturally occurring radioactive elements that are in the salt, they'll damage the crystal and cause it to change color. So those are salt crystals. Those are things that anything that grows out of an evaporating liquid is a salt. And there's lots of different kinds of these salt crystals. And here's another example of one. This one's called mirabolite. And it is very rare to find mirabolite in nature because it's so sensitive. It has so much trapped water inside of it that as soon as you pull that crystal up out of the water, it completely changes to a new mineral. So here's the mirabolite that was able to take a picture of as soon as it was taken out of the water. No more than 20 seconds later was this picture taken. And you can see it's cloudy now. It was nice and clear. Now it's cloudy. It is no longer mirabolite. It's now a mineral called thenardite. So we look at these mineral changes and the environments of which they form and try to predict what minerals might be on Mars, what minerals might be on the moons of Jupiter or Saturn. Are the environments there under those planetary conditions? Are they suitable for life? There's other salts. There's gypsum that we have on Earth, and this has included sand crystals. In fact, gypsum is very good at holding on to DNA within it. So if you go to the Great Salt Lake, you find gypsum crystals there. There's lots and lots of DNA still stuck in it. Now, DNA is not very good because DNA, for looking for life on other planets, because DNA doesn't last for very long inside of a crystal. We'd have to look for other things. There's another mineral called epsomite, and these are the Epsom salts that you can buy at a grocery store. So lots and lots of different kinds of salt crystals. And we're looking at all those different kinds of salts for what kind of salt might be on Mars, what kind of salt might be on the moons of Jupiter and Saturn, and then do experiments and see if they can live in those kinds of environments. So here's one example. So where do we look for life inside of these crystals? This is a salt crystal that I grew in the lab. I took some water from the Great Salt Lake, just took a bottle of it, brought it home to the Natural History Museum, and just let the water evaporate, and I grew this nice crystal in it. But let's take an even closer look at this crystal. So if you zoom in really closely, you start to see these weird markings in there. And all these markings are where fluid from the waters of the Great Salt Lake were trapped inside the crystal as it grew. Now you notice that there's different colored fluids. There might be some pinkish colors up there. Let's take a closer look at those. You can see there's pink colors here, pink colors here. Those are all the beta carotene malt chemicals that the bacteria produce to protect itself from ultraviolet radiation. Now that's where you'd expect to find the bacteria. So if we look even closer, if you zoom really close into one of these, I have a video of that. So that's that little fluid that's trapped inside of a crystal. And you'll see all these little dancing bacteria inside of the crystal. Now they're absolutely tiny. You see them bouncing around all over the place. Let me try to rewind that. Oops, that is not what I wanted to play. There we go. And these are things that they're not alive, right? Well, they are alive, but they're not swimming around under their own power. They're just sort of bouncing around inside the crystal because the water is bouncing around inside the crystal. They're in what's called a dormant state. And they go dormant pretty quick. They go dormant after about 30 or 40 days, but they'll stay in that dormant state for potentially millions of years. There are salt crystals from Mexico, from the Cave of Swords in Mexico, that they're 50,000-year-old bacteria that are living inside of those crystals. So if Mars hasn't had water for really long periods of time, where would you look for life? Well, one example is looking for life that's been trapped inside of crystals that grew a long time ago. So how can they live in these environments for eons? Well, there are different kinds of energy sources for bacteria. We call these things halophiles because these are salt-loving bacteria. Some bacteria are photosynthetic. They undergo photosynthesis like plants for sources of energy. There's also bacteria that are chemosynthetic, and these are ones that use chemicals that are already in the water to produce energy to maintain their cellular parts to them. And those are the ones that we're really looking into, is these chemosynthetic ones. Now, we're doing experiments of salt lakes on the surface of the earth, but we're also looking for crystals, or looking for salt crystals that haven't seen the light of day for over 200 million years. And that's where we go into the mines. This is an example of one of the deepest salt mines in the world. I was there in March of this year, right before coronavirus took off. And that's me inside the mine. I'm about almost a mile down below the surface of the earth, and I'm in the underneath the ocean at this point. So this is a mine called the Balby Mine. It's in the northern part of England, just south of Scotland. So this is Scotland right here. This is, if you can see my mouse, the lower part of the United Kingdom, that's England. And this orange dot is where the mine entrance was. Now we enter the mine at the orange dot, and then we move north under the North Sea once we're underground. Now these salt crystals were deposited by an ancient ocean about 250 million years ago. And they haven't been changed in that entire time period. They're very deep. They haven't seen the sunlight for 250 million years. And we take microscopes down there, and we take a hammer and break open rocks. And we're finding bacteria still alive in those rocks. It's quite amazing. So we know they can live for long periods of time. Now, we don't have a rover that'll go down a mile below the surface of Mars. So maybe there's not life on the surface of Mars. Maybe there's life in the subsurface. But where could life exist on Mars? So that's NASA's primary directive right now. The last Martian rovers were to find evidence of water, and they were able to find that. So put a check mark there. All life that we know it needs water. Even these super salty halophiles, they have to have water in order to survive. So there is water. Find salty places. Yes, we found salty places. This is one example of it. This is a satellite image looking down into the surface of Mars. And I'm going to show a sequence of images that go through one Martian summer. So this is the wintertime in Mars. And then as I move forward, we'll go into the springtime and then into the summer months. And you see these streaks moving across the landscape. So this is like a plateau, and here's a valley on the left-hand side. I'm gonna go back to the winter time. So this is winter again. And you'll start to see these streaks developing. And these are streaks of really salty water that are oozing out of the rocks. And then when it becomes winter again, at the end of summer, then these things evaporate, or they soak back into the ground. Oops. They soak back into the ground, and they're gone. And they'll come back the next year, and the year after that, and the year after that. They reoccur all the time. And so that's really interesting. Like, you have the salt water come up out of the ground. It evaporates, forming crystals. Anything that's trapped inside of those crystals are still stuck there. And then every year this repeats over and over and over again. So there may be even potential sources, new food sources for any bacteria that might be trapped inside of those crystals. So we haven't found any life on Mars. That has not happened yet. No evidence anyway, no fossil evidence of life. So that's the next Mars 2020, the Perseverance rover that's been launched now. It's going to go to a place called Jezero Crater. And I will show an image of what that looks like. So here's Jezero Crater. This is the edge of it. And the different colors represent different minerals. These are all different kinds of salt minerals that are found there. So this looks like an old lake bed on the surface of Mars. You can see a stream channel coming through here, and then there was a lake here at one point in time. And if you compare that to something that's on Earth, we have, this is land here is shown as green, and then we have this river channel moving around. And then as soon as the river enters a lake, it forms this pattern called a delta. So you can see that similar pattern over here on Mars. So this is where the rover is going to go. It's going to land in this area. It's going to drive around and look for evaporate minerals that form by evaporation. And it's going to take a laser spectrometer that has all kinds of instruments on board to look for ancient chemical signs of what life was like. And this is a really good opportunity for finding what might exist on the surface of Mars. All right, and that's where we're at. That rover is now in space. It's about halfway to Mars. So sometime in about 4 or 5 months, it should get there. All right, thank you. Stop sharing. All right, and I'd be happy to take any questions that you might have.
Thank you so much, Dr. Celestian. That picture of you in the bumblebee mine is wild. I can't imagine being that deep under the ground. So we do have a bunch of questions coming in from students. Let's see, we have one student, Brandon, is curious if you have ever been to Mars or if you've worked maybe like on past Mars missions.
I have not been to Mars. That's something that I really don't want to do. I'm happy here on this planet for the moment. And but I know they are training astronauts right now for a manned mission to Mars that could happen in the next 15 to 20 years or so. What was the other part of the question? Sorry.
I think that, yeah, that was Brandon's question. Let's see. A question from William. He's kind of curious about temperature and how that affects crystal formation and maybe why they form when it's hot and not when it's cold or vice versa.
Yeah, so that's really interesting question, William. So we are looking at crystals that form in different temperatures and pressures. So on the surface of Mars, it's pretty cold. So we're looking specifically, maybe halite is one example, but also that mirabolite crystal that I showed you that evaporated pretty quickly on the surface of Earth. That mirabolite would actually be stable on the surface of Mars and definitely stable on the icy moons of Jupiter and Saturn. So all those minerals that may not be fair game on Earth, they would be fair game for life to be trapped in on other moons. And so what we've done is we built what we're calling an icy moon chamber, which is a small chamber that we can grow crystals in at really, really low temperatures, like minus 200 degrees Celsius, and see what grows there and what cryophiles, those are cold-loving bacteria, might live inside of those crystals, and then probe them. So that's a great question. Yeah.
Very cool. You have a mini Mars simulation. Let's see, we've got a bunch of good questions. We have a few students that are kind of curious about your ideas about life and what it could look like. Brick is curious about what it might look like, and then Caitlin is curious about kind of what the implications would be if you were to find life.
Yeah, those are great questions. I wish I could answer them fully, but we're still looking for it. But I really do think that because of how long Mars had water on the surface of its planet, it probably had water on the surface of its planet for maybe 200 million years, 300 to 500 million years. We're not exactly sure. In that time period on Earth, from Earth's formation, 4.5-ish billion years ago to about 4 billion years ago, there was stromatolites. And stromatolites are a primitive bacteria that formed in the early parts of Earth. So if Earth had a chance, if Earth was able to form stromatolites and life within the first 500 million years, it makes sense that life could have started off on Mars 500 years ago. Now, what would that mean? That would mean that what we know of survivability of life forms, what we know of mineral bacteria interaction, which is something that I'm super interested in, is like how do life and minerals interact with each other? That would mean that they're more intertwined than what we had thought. And this might change how we think of how life started on Earth. So it has really tremendous scientific implications.
That's such cool stuff to get to be working on. Henry is wondering about, you kind of mentioned that you use places on Earth to kind of envision what stuff could be like on Mars. So Henry's curious if there's like one place on Earth that is really similar or the most similar to Mars.
Yeah, that's a good question, Henry. So there's not an exact analog for Mars on Earth, but there are places that are close. In the Arctic Circle, in the Canadian Arctic Circle, there is a lake there that evaporates every year, and it's cold and has short days in the wintertime and long days in the summertime, just like Mars. And so that's one place that might be similar to what Mars might be experiencing. The mines, all the salt mines, are definitely analogs to Mars, although we can't go to deep Mars subsurface yet. Some places here in Southern California are pretty close to Mars, the equator around Mars. So even though it does get a little bit hotter here in Southern California, it definitely does get cold in the desert regions. So all the salt lakes in Southern California, Searles Lake, Trona, Mono Lake, those types of lake environments might be something that's similar as well. So yeah, we have to go to a lot of different places on Earth, which is fun. But there are good analogs for sure. Thanks.
Cool. You mentioned Mars is super cold. Camilla is curious, how cold?
So it's in the summertime on Mars, it's probably around, in Fahrenheit, it's probably around 40 degrees Fahrenheit. That would probably be the warmest that it ever gets on Mars. So it gets really, really cold. So cold that even carbon dioxide can freeze in the polar regions in Mars. That's how cold it can get. Places like the moons of Europa and Enceladus, those get down to minus 250 degrees Fahrenheit. They just get super, super cold. Yeah.
Unfathomably cold. So I guess we'll pivot to talking a little bit about you and why you decided to start studying crystals.
So I really, so one of the things that I really liked in school, I was not the straight A student that people think I was. I'm not sure who thinks that, but it definitely was not. Definitely wasn't me. And I had a hard time as a student, especially in high school, to figure out what I was going to do. So I went to community college for 2 years, and that was great. I took a lot of math, a lot of chemistry, and I did like all of that stuff. I didn't really know what to do with it until I went to the University of Arizona, where I got my undergraduate degree from. And then I took a class in mineralogy, and I realized when I took that course that mineralogy is all the physics that I had taken. Mineralogy is all the chemistry, and it's just sort of like to me, it was the perfect blend of science. Plus, I got to work with crystals, which deals with laws of symmetry, and they're gorgeous to look at. Everybody likes crystals, and so I just thought this is going to be it. This is my opportunity to get into the physics and chemistry, but with an applied sort of nature to it. And ever since then, all of my work has been applied, meaning that I studied minerals to solve particular problems like disease or climate change, or in this case, solving the problem of how life could exist on another planet. And yeah, ever since then, I just found my direction at that point. But it took me a while. I didn't come out of high school with that direction, but I did come out of high school with a sense of what kind of what sort of branch. I didn't want to go into business. I knew that. I didn't want to go into history. I knew that. I didn't want to go into biology directly, but I felt like earth science kind of stuff was in chemistry and physics was really interesting to me. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Brooke, kind of related to that, is curious what advice you would give to students that aren't sure what they want to be yet.
So it depends on what stage of that you're in. If you're in if you're in high school right now, I'll say we'll start there, like a freshman or sophomore in high school. I would say that even though you don't see the application to math and the chemistry and the physics that you're taking right now. Right now, what you're doing is you're building up your toolbox. So you need, in order to solve some of these really complicated problems, you need to have a toolbox that you can draw from in order to solve those issues. And the more tools you have in your toolbox, the greater your skill set, the better of a scientist you're going to be into the future. It doesn't, I hate saying this, it doesn't matter what the grades are right now, as long as you have a really good fundamental understanding of the science. You still need to pass the classes, teachers. I totally agree with that. I have 2 kids of my own. It's a struggle. But when you get to college and then you can start exploring some of these research projects, by having a good foundation from middle school and through high school, and you're just building on that, then it's going to be easier for you in the long run. If you wait to get to college before you start building up the skill set and having tools in your toolbox, it'll be more, I would think it would be more of a struggle to find the interesting things that college can show you. So yeah, it's different for everybody, but I think as long as you know that the stuff that you're learning right now is most definitely going to have an application in the end, that's really powerful.
Trusting that the work you're doing now is going to pay off.
Yeah.
Cool. So I think we are just about to the end of our time. I'm going to close it out with a question from Henry. He's wondering what your favorite crystal is.
That changes every day. What some of my favorite crystals is I don't have it right here. I did bring some crystals, but is a mineral called naturalite. It's common enough that you can definitely go out and collect it yourself. There's plenty of naturalite in Southern California that you can collect, but it has some amazing abilities to treat diseases in the human body. It has abilities to absorb radioactive waste from really contaminated sites. In fact, they're using these types of minerals to clean up the radiation spills from the Fukushima nuclear disaster. They're using these things in pharmaceuticals, using these things for capturing lithium from salt water in order to extract it for more energy resources. I mean, the applications that this mineral has is amazing. And I think that's what makes it my favorite mineral, is that there's so much still to learn about it. And I think that's it.
Well, thank you so much. It was really awesome getting to hear about all the amazing work you're doing and kind of how you got to here. So really appreciate it, Dr. Celestian.
Yeah, no problem at all. Thank you for inviting me.
Let's see. So thank you so much to all of our friends and students for joining us today. We learned so much about life on Mars and kind of implications of learning about minerals here on Earth. We'll have the videos from these presentations on our YouTube channel for you to watch later, so you can catch this presentation and any of our past ones on youtube.com/NHMLA. Thanks so much for joining us, and we really hope to see you all again soon. Thanks, everyone.